Les habla René Salgado, presidente de la iniciativa Empresomos Centroamérica. Nos pueden encontrar en empresomos.org. Bienvenidos a esta presentación sobre las características de los ecosistemas emprendedores en ciudades pequeñas, cómo promoverlos y cómo fortalecer su conectividad, lo cual es parte de nuestro programa Empresomos Conectividad Emprendedora Centroamérica que estamos implementando en conjunto con CLATS de INCAE y CAMTIC. En esta ocasión, el profesor Yasuyuki Motoyama nos compartirá sobre los resultados de sus investigaciones recientes sobre el tema. Lo acompaña el profesor Héctor Martínez, quien estará formulando preguntas de interés para la audiencia centroamericana. Motoyama es profesor de Desarrollo Económico Regional en la Knowlton School de la Universidad de Ohio y años atrás fue director de investigación y estrategia de la prestigiosa Kaufman Foundation, dedicada al financiamiento de programas de desarrollo emprendedor de Estados Unidos. Motoyama nos ofrece una comparación de las perspectivas existentes en las investigaciones sobre ecosistemas emprendedores por otros prominentes investigadores del tema, con un análisis crítico de las mismas para luego ofrecernos su propia perspectiva sobre los componentes fundamentales de un ecosistema y de cómo crearlo y fortalecerlo. Notarán que Motoyama insiste en que los ecosistemas emprendedores crecen y se desarrollan de abajo arriba en función a la labor de los emprendedores mismos como parte de la sociedad civil. En este sentido, su análisis es similar al de Ben Spiegel, cuya presentación puede ser vista también en nuestro canal de YouTube, y quien sostiene que el papel del gobierno en el desarrollo emprendedor es el de un facilitador por medio de estrategias y políticas que permitan que fluya la innovación y la creatividad sin inmiscuirse en actividades que la impidan o la obstruyan. Nos acompaña como moderador del diálogo el doctor Héctor Martínez, como dijimos antes, nicaragüense, profesor del Gatton College de Negocios y Economía de la Universidad de Kentucky y profesor invitado de INCAE en Costa Rica. Motoyama hará su exposición y luego se abrirá el diálogo con las preguntas del doctor Martínez. Aunque el video de la conversación en inglés contiene subtítulos en este idioma, estos pueden ser configurados para ser leídos en español presionando el botón subtítulos y haciendo la correspondiente selección. Esperamos que este diálogo sea de provecho para toda nuestra audiencia. Gracias. Okay, Professor Motoyama has the floor.
Thank you very much, Rene. So my name is Yas Motoyama. I'm an associate professor of city and regional planning at Ohio State University. As I have been doing entrepreneurship and local systems, hereafter I call it ecosystems, research for the past 10 years or so, I'd like to share some of the things that I have found. When you talk about the entrepreneurship ecosystem, this may be the most frequently used diagram by Dan Eisenberg of Babson College. The entrepreneurship ecosystem needs to have a finance, like a venture capital arm, and needs to have the entrepreneurial culture, needs to have support organizations, needs to have high skill human capital, people labor, and needs to have the experimental market, and needs to have supportive government and policy. And that turns out that there are many other scholars who are trying to use some visualization of this ecosystem. They are often round or oval, or sometimes looks like a triangle or rectangular. But many of these ecosystems proposed by the entrepreneurship scholars have so-called the common elements. So sort of repeating but of what I just mentioned like a minute or two ago, but many of these what ecosystem models have these elements: the venture capital, financial institutions, incubators, university, especially research university, support government, anchor firms like the big companies in your area, along with skilled labor, supportive culture, some form of entrepreneurial networks. However, I am a little critical of this element approach. Basically, this ecosystem model suggests that if your region has these elements, and if your region have all these elements, you will have a successful entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship ecosystem. And the reason I'm critical is because there are some cities in the US that have all of these elements, but not exactly really working. One example mentioned by Bresnitz and Taylor was Atlanta. And the other one is Baltimore by Feldman. And the third one, for example, is Cleveland, which Hector knows quite well. And these are just, ABC examples of one of the many, many examples of American cities that entrepreneurship may not be working that well, even though they have all these ecosystem elements. Also, many of these ecosystem models have an overemphasis on finance or venture capital branch, as well as technology transfer from research university. And this can be quite a critical issue for smaller cities because often the finance sectors and research universities are located in a big city, and small cities usually don't have those elements. But let me change the subject for a little bit. And here is a map of the US and some of the cities that I have studied in the back. I started my entrepreneurship research in Berkeley, California. That is part of Silicon Valley here near Sacramento and San Francisco. Then I moved to Kansas City, continued researching St. Louis, Indianapolis, and now I'm at Columbus, Ohio. I've also studied more smaller cities, Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is between Nashville and Atlanta, and also a couple of cities in Montana. And of the different cities I have looked at, I think this interview quote represents the most challenging program of most cities. And this was back in the interview in 2012 with Jim Brasunas, who was executive director of Entrepreneurship Support Organization. And he was describing the challenge of St. Louis. The typical program with entrepreneurs in St. Louis 5 years ago was like this. One person will say, an entrepreneur will say, I do this business alone, and I don't know other startups in town. I don't know investors here, and there's only old money from big corporations in St. Louis. So I go to Silicon Valley to find an investor. Then if you talk to investors, they would say, I don't find any startups in St. Louis. And in fact, there may not be any prospective startups here. So I go to Silicon Valley to find companies to invest. So somehow they might find each other in Silicon Valley, but not in St. Louis. What this explains is quite a bit of disconnections between people, organizations, and many of the elements between ecosystems that we were talking just a few minutes ago. So the flip side of that is what entrepreneurs need most. And of the cities that I have looked at, and the places that seem to function quite well in terms of the ecosystem, is that if the city can offer knowledge to navigate the tumultuous journey of entrepreneurship, because by starting your own company and running your companies, entrepreneurs face so many problems, like every day, every week, probably big issues every month or so. And they need to find some form of answers that how they can overcome those problems. But the best way that they can learn that knowledge is through connections and learning from other entrepreneurs. So here I want to emphasize that it is not through looking at YouTube or video clips. listening to the lectures from famous professors of entrepreneurship or business schools, but through the interactions and learning from other entrepreneurs. Then I'd like to shift our conversation a little bit. Okay, so that was some of the medium-sized cities in the US, like St. Louis, Kansas City, Indianapolis, Columbus. All of them have a population of about 2 million at the metropolitan level. But the smaller cities, Chattanooga, Tennessee, which has at the metro level about 500,000 population, and the Montana cities are even smaller, about 100,000 population in Bozeman and Missoula. And a few things are clear to me. These smaller cities actually have a very high level of entrepreneurship activities in all stages, from at the startup level, some successful exit level, some of the companies really successfully growing, or some of them making a spin-offs, meaning that some of the people worked at the successful companies and start more new companies. And there are some reasons for this high levels of entrepreneurship. And one particularly related to the connectivity between entrepreneurs and learning is that in small cities, people are more open. They are more willing to help, and they know each other quite well. So it is easier to create the connectivity between entrepreneurs. Second, small cities, of course, don't have all the elements that we have been talking about, but you don't have to have all of them in your town. People, especially in Montana, entrepreneurs in Montana, they are willing to travel 300 kilometers one way, and they go in one day and they just come back on the same day. So like to, and here are some of the other tips that I have found where in the regions where they seem to be successful in establishing some of the connectivities between entrepreneurs. First, it must be in person, some activities, events, networks, because entrepreneurs, like for the learning of entrepreneurs, they need a spontaneous meeting and bouncing ideas between like different people, multiple people. It's not just, one person saying, I have this question, and one person answers, you have to do that. But usually, you don't find the answer that easily. So you have to test ideas with so many different people. So one is in person. Second, must be interactive event or activity to promote learning among participants. So, lectures by university professors, and I'm a university professor too, and I say something self-contradictory, but big lecture from a professor does not exactly help this connectivity and knowledge flows between entrepreneurs. But it must be the interaction between entrepreneurs. And for that purpose, third, it must have an entrepreneurial content. So this is, I'm not saying that you should have some kind of, network parties or cocktail parties, but it must have entrepreneurial content, some discussion about entrepreneurial activities, someone's business model or someone's business challenges. Fourth, it needs to also have some regularity in this entrepreneurial events or activities, because even if you have like one very well attended entrepreneurial event like once a year, for the rest of basically 11.5 months, if entrepreneurs don't have any opportunities to bounce ideas, meet people, ask questions, or learn something, it doesn't really work well. So some form of regularity will be important. Monthly, maybe bi-monthly. If you can make it weekly, it would be better as well. And when you start the new kind of networks among entrepreneurs, it will most likely grow organically, little by little. And this regularity will help people to attract, because even if someone misses one meeting one time, people know that I missed one this time, but I know that at that place they will have it next month or next week. Fifth, it often is organized by a few motivated and well-networked individuals. So it's not usually one person starting the networking activities. One person's network is always limited, but if you get to know, if a few people are organizing and bringing in, like each person bringing in a few people, that's going to be instantly making, like, let's say 3 by 3, 9 people. It's a network of 9 people instead of one person bringing 3 or 5 people. That's better than that's going to be bigger. And if those 9 people can bring in more people later, that's going to be even better. So as a quick summary, my suggestion, especially for establishing a functioning entrepreneurship ecosystem in small town, do not chase conventional elements of the ecosystem, which are pretty much modeled after the Silicon Valley. But the most important thing you have to look at is to establish the connectivity and learning for entrepreneurs. So I'd like to ask 2 questions here at the end. In your city, like, is there a go-to place for entrepreneurs? Does it have like a periodic meeting in structure? Like, who is really organizing it? Question 2, how are you tracking your regional progress? And quite often people kind of track how many number of support organizations in your town, how much like a venture capital money flew into your town, but there should be some other metrics that every town should be looking at it. Okay, let me stop my presentation here and let's use it as kind of like a initial materials, and I would welcome any questions, and also I will welcome the conversation with Hector.
Excuse me, I was muted. Sorry about that. All right. So thank you so much, Yaz, for such an interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions just coming off from that the slides. So there's a couple of things that initially come to me. First of all, how are you identifying an ecosystem, right? In the sense of, when do we know that Columbus and Chattanooga and those Montana cities have an ecosystem for entrepreneurs versus the Atlantas, Baltimore, and Cleveland examples that you identified?
Yeah, interesting question. It's extremely qualitative dimension.
Sure.
But if I go to start a new research in a new city, I'm going to ask people, and there are, let's say, 2 kinds of people. One, entrepreneurship support organization side, and the other is entrepreneurs side. And I place a little more emphasis on the entrepreneur side because these are the entrepreneurs are the center of entrepreneurship, and they should be the center of the any entrepreneurship ecosystem. And I ask entrepreneurs often questions about what is your business, how do you do it, but I also ask the question in your city, like what kind of problem did you face, what kind of help did you receive in your city? And if people say like, oh, here's one example, I faced this problem and I want to talk to that person, or there is this network or activity going on and I got that and I got the answer. I think that is a pretty healthy sign that some functioning ecosystem exists. On the other hand, if it's a city that was not functioning so well, entrepreneurs often say that basically nobody, I'm trying to solve this problem myself.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And with Renee, we've had a conversation before in other researcher who talked a lot about the difficulties, the emotional difficulties of entrepreneurs, particularly. I think, you know, that the absence of that type of support definitely sort of points towards that complication. Okay, so the other question or idea that sort of popped up, and I really liked the slide of how to promote the ecosystem in those meetings and you know, of those types of things. There's a concept on my side of the research that talks about peer coaching in groups, and that's exactly, I think, what you described. In were you able to identify or see those meetings? Did you go to them and sort of see what was going on in those places? If not, just maybe it was the experience of the entrepreneurs. If you can say a little bit more about how you were able to identify those particular qualities, those meetings.
Yeah, another good question. So I'd say, so in Kansas City, I started to be there in 2011, and I started to work for a place called the Kaufman Foundation. And Kaufman was nationally known, but they were not so active locally. And we were realizing that like we have so many connections nationally, but we don't know much about what's going on inside the city. But how can we get to know? We looked around us and basically came to conclude that we don't have much connections. And that's the first kind of the answer we got. And second, so we started to look, okay, what kind of organizations are there in town? And we were realizing that there are not so many, not that functions as like a gravity or to-go places for entrepreneurs. Like there are like some small organizations here and there, and each one of them is organizing some small events or some kind of like a workshops, more like a training sessions. But that was about it. So we actually started, my colleagues started on their own, and that became the basis for 1 Million Cup. And that's in a format that once a week they meet at, they picked up 9 a.m. Wednesday, and an entrepreneur comes and he makes the presentation only for 6 minutes. That is about his business. And if you let entrepreneurs only talk about his business, he's going to say all the good things and how great he's doing. But we ask every entrepreneur, you talk about the challenge you are facing with your business. Then the rest of 24 minutes are reserved for interactions, Q&As. Then the audience wants to help. Like, you know, if your problem is this, did you talk with that person? You know, did you try this? Like lots of, you know, good ideas come out. So that's, you know, that's for one round, and they will have another round with the second entrepreneur. At the beginning, there are only 13 people coming to this event, and the 3 core people basically invited, you know, 3 or, you know, 4 other people, and that was 13. But quite soon, those people are inviting other friends, and within 6 months, it's actually within 4 months, I think about 100 people started to show up at Kaufman Foundation. So that's one example that we did not, we really did not have anything on the ground, but, you know, like my colleagues started to do it. In St. Louis, I think beginning 2010, 2011 was probably the cusp of a change that some support organizations were doing, you know, something similar on their own versions. That one organization was organizing something called the, I think it was the second Thursday. So that was a monthly event that they will invite their entrepreneurs and, you know, have some kind of events and kind of like a mixer events that they were organizing that was attracting events. Washington University, St. Louis was also organizing some other events, and they were getting attractions. I'm sorry, maybe I'm deviating from your original question.
I think this is great. This is exactly going towards it a little bit. But I don't know if you wanted to finish your thought there, but I think.
No,
Yeah.
I will try to answer your question most effectively.
No,
So
but
if
I think I was following you along definitely with what you're saying. So thinking a little bit further about the ecosystem concept that you've talked about, there's a couple of other ideas that I think kind of overlap for me, at least in my familiarity. And maybe you can speak a little bit about some of the differences if you're familiar with them. But definitely one of the first ones that sort of struck with me is the clusters, right? The notion, Michael Porter's notions of cluster development. He wrote particularly about wines in Northern California and how that generated these types of dynamics. Obviously, your focus is on entrepreneurs, but having said that, I'm kind of interested if there is some similarities or some differences that you might be able to identify from those concepts. The other sort of in a more broad perspective that became very popular in Europe and a couple of places is that the Bilbao effect, right? After the development of the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, everybody sort of was looking for the development of their cities based on these great constructions, these great buildings that they developed, right? And it much like your ecosystem model, it doesn't always turn out the way that they've expected. So just if there's any thoughts or any responses to those that at least I'm more familiar with.
Okay, yeah. Let me respond to your second question first. And so maybe not every city will try to make Guggenheim Museum, but so many cities in the US try to establish incubators. That's another physical space. And basically the concept is, since entrepreneurs, small businesses don't have much money, public or semi-public organization will provide a cheap space so that entrepreneurs can come and they can operate businesses. And that will attract entrepreneurs and some great things will happen. I have visited many incubators and that's usually not true. If you go to many traditional incubators, first thing that struck me was that it's so quiet, very silent. Entrepreneurs don't talk to each other. There is no interaction. There is no learning. It's just functioning as a cheap space. But if you can, convert it, like, some entrepreneurs, do come there. And if you can organize some kind of workshops or events, networks that, they can intermingle, that's gonna make the change about this interaction. Going to your first question about cluster, yeah, that's a big kind of challenge and question for most regions, because when you try to talk about any economic development topics, and entrepreneurship is usually one of the economic development topics, naturally conversation goes to our city. The biggest asset is this company, the cluster company or the anchor company that I have described in the presentation. So we should be, thinking about entrepreneurship strategies, along that anchor companies or structure. Unfortunately, that is often a trap that many cities get into, because there are actually very few interactions between the cluster anchor company and entrepreneurs. Unless entrepreneurs are specifically targeting, the local big company, anchor company as the customer. But in my view, that actually happens rather rare. Entrepreneurs are looking at more like usually some bigger, different kinds of market structure, and their customers are completely different. So some cities try to promote entrepreneurship in a very, some highly selected sector along the anchor company. But that does not exactly, make many things to spark or make the, kind of a cohesion with the entrepreneurs. So in that sense, I don't think you need to develop the entrepreneurial strategies based on your a cluster anchor company.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking right here in the Lexington area, we have, of course, Toyota, and a lot of companies, smaller companies, sort of do exactly like you were describing. I guess in Columbus or around that area, you have Nissan, that also sort of
Honda, yeah.
Honda. I'm sorry, that's the other one. Yeah. There's a industry development around some of that with some of the entrepreneurs. Very, very interesting. So thinking about maybe, and I guess bringing it into the Latin American perspective, I guess I want to approach this from two ways. If you were starting from zero, let's say, a city that perhaps is looking to develop or intentionally looking to develop this ecosystem for entrepreneurs. I mean, there's a lot of sort of complex interactions, obviously, in your model that you started off with. Would you say that there might be a more traditional pathway order that you've seen in some of these examples? Is that even possible? I'm just, I guess I would like to take a little bit of a broader sort of how to develop from that perspective at the city level.
Yeah, so on this point, I generally agree with Brad Fels. Like he has written like entrepreneurial communities. First book came out in 2012, and the second book came out 2020 or 21, maybe more recently. He explicitly states that this entrepreneurial community should be led by entrepreneurs, not by government. And in general, I do agree. It's not like 100% like, exclusively entrepreneurs, but in most cases, pretty much most cases, it should be by entrepreneurs, because this will be the networks of entrepreneurs where entrepreneurs, interact and learn from each other. So not the government or the nonprofit or some other support organizations learning from each other. That's that's going to be very different from what we have been talking about today. So that's one. Two, but it's always so you have to build this network or something from bottom up. Not the government top down, but that's always difficult. Like where does it begin is like kind of chicken or egg question. And yeah, finding your first customer is always hard for entrepreneurs. Finding the first step for entrepreneurs ecosystem is always hard too. I think the best way is entrepreneurs or somewhere close to entrepreneurs. One person is not usually enough. Yeah, you can start a new kind of events, but usually it dies out after a few meetings or a few months. So if you can identify two other like-minded entrepreneurs or people who wants to really promote this kind of entrepreneurship ecosystem, and start talking like what can you do? What kind of people what kind of people you can bring in, what kind of events you can organize, and do that. So that's like usually a minimum of 3 people makes one big difference. Third, start small and try to grow like gradually. You don't have to, like in your first meeting, you don't have to bring in 100 people. Like you can try that, but it's so hard, even in mid to big size cities, and in a smaller city it might be also very hard too. But I think so. 3. So I sort of laid out the numbers before, but 3 people, and each person bringing in 3 other people, and that's going to be 9 or 10 people. That's, I think, good enough as the first meeting. But try to make it, then those 9 people should bring in more people next time, then more next time. That kind of gradual incremental growth is more healthy development for many of the events or networks that I have observed.
Really, really clearly now I've identified the notion of the community building and the networking as really pivotal in the development of this. This is very good. I guess the other thing that I guess I would ask just from that response as well. I guess I'm thinking a little bit of the stage of an entrepreneur, right? And of course, there's a lot of research around the stages of entrepreneurs. Maybe perhaps if you've seen or identified the types of entrepreneurs that have been successful in developing these types of network meetings or community meetings. I don't know if you have any insight on that side of it.
Yeah, no, great question. And I have not seen much like a research before. So this is really based on my personal observation. But let's say, there are some different stages that kind of people who are thinking about starting a company. So aspirational entrepreneurs, but not the company is. The other is startup entrepreneurs who are like, I'm running the company. I have this business model. I have this customer, or I'm really trying to get the customer, and I have an employee that I have to pay, like very startup kind of phase. Then some of the startup entrepreneurs, and I have first few customers, but not that much. I see that probably the next level is somewhat successful entrepreneurs who has a revenue of, let's say, US dollar 100,000 to 500,000, but who is thinking about expanding the business, but I don't know how exactly I can do it. So that's more like a growth stage entrepreneurs. If you want to start a new entrepreneurial events or networks, it's not that easy to like mingle all kinds of entrepreneurs because the stages are so different. So the questions or challenges they have are so different. So some of the advanced entrepreneurs look at the startup entrepreneurs and like, yeah, that's the questions I went through 5 years ago, and I'm sorry, but you guys are baby, so I won't be interacting too much with you. That can happen. So in general, I think the good target is like aspirational entrepreneurs or startup entrepreneurs. They tend to have just like so many questions kind of together that like every step they bump into something, and they can find some other some kind of a solutions or learn from each other.
Yeah.
That's my suggestion. Then the other thing I like to add is, okay, then how about the growth stage entrepreneurs? If maybe as a next step of your city, you can kind of target more special, like specific networking for the growth stage entrepreneurs. They have their own like kind of like learnings, questions to each other that can be very helpful. I have seen some of the kind of like a cohort and group based like a mentoring systems, which you might have been referring earlier, of the growth stage entrepreneurs. And some of them are very successful in Kansas City and St. Louis. So that's one thing. Sometimes the growth stage entrepreneurs need to talk to like more like highly experienced entrepreneurs who are managing multi-million-dollar businesses, who have been running businesses for 10, 20 years. And sometimes those people, if they are willing to serve as mentors to the more younger generation of entrepreneurs, it might work well. But the chemistry between these growth stage entrepreneurs and senior entrepreneurs, it's not that easy to mix. It depends on personality. You need to think about what kind of format to mix them. So there are many challenges, but that's another interesting aspect. Maybe that's like a stage 3 of the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I absolutely think you're right in those. Having the search for new information or at least new input really drives those meetings. And of course, if you've already passed some of those stages, it gets to be a little repetitive, or at least you're not getting what you're expecting out of it. So I guess my final question at this point, yes, and thank you so much for this, would be, I don't know if you, and if you had a chance, at least, if you've seen any of these ecosystems just maybe off the cuff in Latin America. Have you, and we know that there's so many different countries, of course, and different industries and different sort of dynamics, but I don't know if you've maybe seen anything in your radar of Latin America that is sort of developing a bit in the ecosystem.
Yeah, it is unfortunately when I have been to Mexico, several parts of Oaxaca, and Michoacan and Querétaro, but spending a few days, I didn't develop any deep knowledge of entrepreneurship ecosystem. I have also been to Honduras, Costa Rica, in Nicaragua, some years ago, but again, it usually takes a time to, like kind of wet your feet and, soak your mind for the local entrepreneurship. It does take time. So yeah, unfortunately, I don't have any deep knowledge about any of the Latin America ecosystem. Yeah.
No, but I'm sure that these ecosystems do sort of develop even without the sight of researchers. It's always interesting when they do appear, even in spaces you don't expect them to appear. So it's always wonderful.
But so maybe if I could add one point. So every local ecosystem I saw in the US, so Kansas City, St. Louis, Indianapolis, and Columbus, it's very different. It's because the key people who kind of start the organizations from like very different backgrounds, different kinds of people, or key organizations involved, they are very different in every city. So again, government can be part of the ecosystem, but government is not the driver though of the ecosystem. It's something more bottom-up, grassroots. So the way it kind of turns out in every region is very different. So I bet it's going to be very different in each city and country of Latin America as well. And in a way, I think it is a very healthy thing that if you can have if you have a functioning ecosystem, basically the key point is whether you have a functioning ecosystem where entrepreneurs can learn from each other, and you don't have to imitate any of the US or Silicon Valley system. So yeah, I think it's going to be. I love to see different yet very healthy Latin American ecosystems.
Yeah. I was an entrepreneur for 8 years of my life in Managua, Nicaragua, and it was very limited. that notion of finding support felt very, very limited. So, but thank you so much, Yas. Really, really insightful stuff and wonderful. I think community development in this is so impactful. René, you have you're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
No, this was indeed a very interesting viewpoint about the ecosystems. One of the things that I like the most, Jazz, is your bottom-up approach, particularly in societies where governments are not necessarily very accountable and very responsible. Okay? So we strongly believe at Empresomos that that is the approach for entrepreneurship in many places. Okay, and that should be the line to follow. I have only a couple of final questions for you. Yes, I have always wondered if the cluster idea may at times be a limitation to the creation of and growing of new competitive advantages. That's one question that may. I mean, I'm just posing the question. Now, the other one has to do with synergies and facilitating the knowledge and know-how connections. Okay? Now we have the internet, and we have the possibility of doing this type of engagements. In fact, two of our associates, Klatsin Kai and Kamtik, when we discussed these possibilities, we said, well, we should bring together international thinkers and international entrepreneurs and link them to the locals and to the regional and have all those connections, so to speak. You only spoke about local synergies mostly, but what do you think about these possibilities that are open nowadays via the internet to do more things than what traditionally entrepreneurs have done locally, so to speak?
Yeah, good question. So let me talk about, try to respond to the second question. I think it is always possible, but so far, with my observations, I have not seen a very effective non-in-person kind of entrepreneurial network activities. And the reason is, I think there may be several reasons, but first, you need to get to know more than a few people. Because you want to, one person does not necessarily have the, kind of a solutions to this specific entrepreneur. And, an entrepreneur needs to bounce the idea with multiple people. So this like multiple connections are needed. And like internet, this kind of Zoom, one-on-one talk is okay. Three people talking becomes kind of actually rather difficult. If there are 4 or more people, people start talking to each other and we cannot really understand each other. So it actually kind of prevents lots of like a, spontaneous kind of, crash of ideas. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think for this bouncing ideas, the basis of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you need to develop some form of trust between other people. I have heard that, sometimes you don't want to talk about the, some entrepreneurs don't want to talk about the business models to other entrepreneurs because they are worried about, the idea being stolen. That's one. The other could be, you just don't want to talk about the biggest problem of your organization to some other people randomly. And for that purpose, usually in person and getting more than this digital screen will give you an idea that is this the person I can really talk about this problem. People get the better sense and people can adapt better. So, but I that's only my observation so far, and things may be changing, and I'd love to see, if there are some counter examples. I would welcome to hear that.
Okay. Well, thank you so very, very much to Professor Motoyama and Professor Martinez for this enlightening conversation, and which is part of the that association that we have in it's called Entrepreneurial Connectivity Central America, with CLAD SINCAE and CAMTIC. And it's going to, we invite our audience. Well, first of all, we're sure that for our audience is going to be very helpful. And we invite our audience to watch similar exchanges in our YouTube channel. Okay, thank you again.